Thank you first and foremost to everybody that has joined us this afternoon. So we are looking at the curriculum and assessment review and really going to be unpicking what does this mean for science. So my name is Sarah Hudson and I am the National Education Lead for Primary Science here at Twinkl. It does say that it's presented by myself and Ashley Morris. Now, sadly, she can't join us this afternoon. She is our secondary National Education Lead. However, for secondary colleagues, I still will be going through the findings of this and the recommendations. So there will be lots and lots of really good things for you to take away from this. And if there are any specific secondary questions that you have, please do use that Q&A function because I can send them over to the secondary team and we can get any answers back to you straight away, after this session during this next week. So please do pop your questions in there and I will get Ash and the team to answer those. So as I said, my name is Sarah. And a little bit about me and my background to start. So I've been in education for the last decade, and that is over lots of different roles. So I've been a primary class teacher and a science lead, and that looked at developing the subject of science within my school and across the schools of others. I then was very lucky to move into educational publishing as a primary science specialist, and then later as head of primary science. And that looked at developing curriculum and PD and content for that. And then very excitingly in July this year, I joined Twinkl on the National Education Leads team. And that is really about raising the profile of primary science in this subject area. So today, as I said, I'm going to be speaking about the curriculum and assessment review. So the contents of our session that we'll be looking at this afternoon. We'll first be looking at some of the overall findings. I'm going to start broad and then I'm really going to start narrowing it down into those key findings that are specific to science. So that overview of science then, what are the themes that are coming out through primary and secondary? What is it really telling us about our subject? Before taking a deep dive into primary science, so any primary science colleagues with me today, there's lots of recommendations and things that you can take back to classroom, start thinking about straight away. I'll then be doing the same for secondary science as well and looking at some climate and sustainability education. So this section has been specifically written by our sustainability lead, Kat Oakes. So if you have any really specific questions for her, please pop them in that Q&A and we can get those answered and sent over to you. And then the final section that we'll be looking at this afternoon is what's next. So what is it that schools can be thinking about now? Is there anything that, Twinkl can already offer you to help support that transition in this phase? So before I start unpicking the findings, I'd be really interested to find out what your initial reaction to the curriculum and assessment review is. So I do have a slider on the slide here. So if you are watching on a laptop, you can just scan that QR code and that should just take you to all the different options that you can tell me about that there. And if you are joining on your phone, you can find it at slido.com and then by putting that number in. But I'd be really, really interested in seeing what your initial reactions are. Oh, we've got some coming through straight away. So somewhat positive there. So we've got some coming through. Thank you for your vote in there. Are there any others that are coming through? Got a couple that are very positive and somewhat positive. Neutral coming through there. I'll just give it another moment or so if you've not voted yet and would like to. So thank you to the people that have voted in this already, and this will keep changing as I am talking now. And it's really interesting because I think there has been some mixed feelings throughout it. There's some fantastic recommendations that are coming through, and I think some nerves probably about the upcoming changes as well. Recommendations are saying and what's coming next. So thank you for your contributions to this so far. If you would like to still contribute to this, then it will still keep coming through and we can have a look back at that later. I want to start off, first of all, with a timeline of the curriculum and assessment review. And this really is thinking about the changes that have happened and that are coming, but also to give you, a bit of an understanding about how long these are going to take. So the curriculum and assessment review was commissioned in July 2024 led by Becky Francis, and the interim report was released in March of 2025 this year. So as many of you will have seen and will be reading as furiously as we have here at Twinkl, the full curriculum and assessment review was released in November 2025. So that had recommendations, and also within there, the government produced their response to that report. So then these next 2 points here are really thinking about, well, what's coming next? So the revised national curriculum is going to be released in spring 2027. And then it is looking like schools are going to start teaching that new curriculum starting in September 2028. So really here, there's some reassurance that we do have some time now to start thinking about those curriculum changes and implementing them within our schools. So this is really some reassurance around that there is time. It's not that we're going to have to change something overnight. There's lots of fantastic recommendations, and we can really use this time now to implement them fully and implement them well. So the two responses that I will be referencing throughout the webinar this afternoon is, of course, the curriculum and assessment review, but also looking at the government response to that as well. So these are the two key documents here that we're really going to be unpicking. So as I mentioned in the contents, I'm going to start wider and then I'm going to start branching it down and really unpicking those science findings. So some overall findings for different, across the subject areas and across the curriculum from the curriculum and assessment review to start us off. So first of all, they've recommended that we introduce an oracy framework alongside the existing reading and writing frameworks. I myself have seen the power of oracy within schools, so it's something that I'm very, very excited that's going to be introduced for schools. Secondly, it stated that the national curriculum is going to be released as a digital product, and that's so schools and educators can really see those clear links between subjects and really help schools navigate their way to through the new curriculum. There's also a recommendation that they want to review and update the programs of studies to ensure that young people feel represented wherever possible. We know that children need to feel seen within the curriculum, feel heard within the curriculum, to feel a part of it. So this is a real positive that they want to see that representation coming through as much as possible. As well, they also want to think about exemplification and guidance for curriculum and for pedagogical adaptation for learners with SEND, and that is across lots of different subjects, so all subject areas and all curriculum areas as well. And finally, the one that I really wanted to pull out as one of the main overarching themes is that the next stages of the national curriculum development really involves teachers within that testing. So it's going to be designing programs of study that are ambitious, but also that are realistic to teach as well. And I think it's key that teachers and educators are part of these next phases. So now we're going to have a little look at an overview of science then. So this is both for primary and for secondary phases. What are some of the key findings and what are some of the key recommendations? So the first finding, that there is a greater need for coherence and clearer sequencing across key stages in science, and that is right at the start of primary all the way through secondary and beyond in there. So I think this is a key theme that will come through this webinar this afternoon, is there is that need for coherence and sequencing in there. And the recommendation that came from that is that they want a more coherent, structured science curriculum across all key stages. So really thinking about those transition periods from the early years into Key Stage 1, from Key Stage 2 into Key Stage 3, and then Key Stage 4 as well, to ensure that children, young learners, students are getting that real clear, coherent picture all the way through their education. The second finding that was highlighted is that practical science has reduced overall, and at points it might not be quite clearly linked to those curriculum purposes, and this is in both primary and in secondary. So a recommendation from that is that all practical work really needs to be purposeful at all key stages, and there needs to be clear aims and guidance around that to really help and support all teachers in ensuring that children and students have access to high quality and purposeful practical work. And again, across both primary and secondary, there are some issues around representation in science, and that can really affect pupils' sense of relevance and engagement with the subject. If children are finding it hard to see themselves as scientists, then they are less likely to want to take, science further, and of their enjoyment of science as well. So a key recommendation here is that we really need to strengthen that representation within the curriculum so that all pupils, every single child, can see science as relevant and purposeful for them. So now I'll take you through some of the key findings for primary science specifically then. As I mentioned earlier, if you hadn't joined us right at the start, I will be looking at the secondary findings after this as well. And if you do have any specific secondary questions, please do pop them in the Q&A and I'll get those answered for you. So let's start with an overview of primary science, and I've broken this down into different areas. So first of all, there are some systemic challenges within primary science, and that's broken again down into prioritization, support, and engagement. So science is a core subject, and rightly a core subject, although at primary it may not be prioritized in the same way. There's also some issues around support for teachers in delivering high quality primary science, and that has been evidenced within the curriculum and assessment review, and that can lead to lack of engagement from children. So secondly, in 2009, there was the removal of the Key Stage 2 SATs testing for science, and that was replaced with teacher assessment. But from that, it may have reduced the visibility of science as a core subject and the accountability of that and teaching focus as well. At points, science doesn't receive as much teaching time within the primary curriculum and the timetable, and that can really hinder children's progress and that chance to succeed within science. So the third point that I want to mention here is about curriculum delivery. So within different schools, there is a wide range of variation of how science is taught, how often science is taught, and the time that is given within any given timetable. There are recommendations of how much time should be given to science as a subject, but this is very dependent on school, dependent on different pressures as well. So there is unequal access to that high quality science across different schools. And the fourth point that I would like to highlight here is that transition to secondary. There can be some issues around that, just with continuity of subject. It may be as well that the coverage of some topics is repeated, or children have already learned topics, and we really need to think about how we can smooth that transition so that children are leaving us in primary in year 6 and then getting that best start to science in year 7. So there's no repetition of content, and that it is built on accurately and purposefully all the way through their primary and their secondary journey as well. So let's have a look at some key takeaways for primary science. And I've broken these down again into 6 key areas. So on my first slide here, I've got the first 3 key areas. So the first idea is about that coherent and connected curriculum. So the finding here was that there is inconsistent teaching across primary that leaves gaps in time, coverage, and sequencing. And the impact of that could be that pupils don't master key ideas within primary science. So the big ideas that we would like children to know within primary science, if they're not really solid, they don't have that deep understanding of them, it can make those transitions into secondary more difficult for children. And the recommendation from the curriculum and assessment review is that we really need to clarify exactly what is taught, at what depth and when, so to secure that progression all the way through. Children are not introduced into concepts within primary that are covered within the secondary curriculum, but they're having that really deep and solid understanding of the curriculum, those big ideas within science that are age appropriate at primary. So secondly, then we've got knowledge and understanding. So the finding again here is linked with that, the idea of the coherent connected curriculum, that pupils in primary don't always secure those key ideas, vocabulary, or confidence with using evidence. So the impact of that on children can be that weak foundations within science learning and understanding make those abstract scientific ideas harder to understand and then harder to apply. And a key recommendation here is that we need to be thinking about how we really ground these concepts in real life experiences, how we can help children to understand that the science they're learning in lessons is helping them to understand more about the world around them. And we want to give them that really frequent early exposure to scientific ideas and language as well. So again, it's going back to that confidence for children, so they've got that really deep and solid understanding and those foundations and base. And then a third recommendation, or a third key finding that came out from that, was a balance between disciplines and cross-curricular links as well. Coverage across biology, chemistry and physics is currently uneven within the primary curriculum. And there are more opportunities for cross-curricular links between different subjects. There are often links, between Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 content that are often missed as well. So the lack of balance and continuity can limit some children to build those really strong connections and build that concrete scientific understanding. Now, I think it's important here that when we're thinking about the recommendation, which is to provide a more balanced between the disciplines of biology, physics and chemistry, and strengthen those cross-curricular links, that we're thinking about that age appropriateness as well. So we're ensuring that we're not introducing content too soon, but we do need more of a balance between those disciplines so that children, again, are having the best start to that secondary transition and further on. So then, this second set of key takeaways, and these are not in any order, these are 6 key things that I've really pulled out from here. Purposeful practical work, that idea of representation and belonging, and climate and sustainability education. So with purposeful practical work, we have touched on this slightly as I was looking at the overview of science as a whole, but practical science as a whole has declined overall, and it's not often clearly linked to curriculum aims. Now, we know as science educators that practical work really is at the heart of science and purposeful practical work. So without clear purpose, practical work can fail to reinforce those concepts or build that procedural confidence. And it's really important that any practical work that children are undertaking within the primary classroom is really linked to those curriculum aims. What is it exactly that we want children to know, and how is this how is this practical work helping to improve that or help them to understand that? So then a key recommendation from the review is that we need to really highlight what activities we want children to be undertaking, but what the purpose of these activities are as well. It needs to be thinking about that it's concept driven and it's focused on developing that understanding for children. So then thinking back to the finding of representation and belonging, there is currently within the national curriculum for primary, there is limited representation of diverse scientists, and this can reduce engagement for children and reinforce the idea that science is not for them, which we really do not want any child within their primary education to believe. The impact of this really is that when Pupils, when children don't see themselves reflected, their sense of belonging and interest in science can weaken. So a recommendation from the Curriculum and Assessment Review is that we want to really include diverse, inclusive examples alongside core content, so that it runs alongside it, so that all pupils see science as relevant and accessible to them. And then finally, then we've got climate and sustainability education. So currently at the moment within the primary science curriculum, climate science is limited explicitly within the curriculum. Now, these gaps can make it harder for children to understand climate causes, consequences, and solutions. And that is a large finding from the curriculum that we want to, prepare learners for the future. So that, climate and sustainability education has to be key to that. So we need to think about how we're going to strengthen and integrate climate content within that across the disciplines of biology, chemistry, and physics to build that confident, age-appropriate understanding of how their world is changing and what impact they can have to improve and change that. So those were the key takeaways for primary science. I'm now going to have a look at Asha's key takeaways for secondary science as well. So again, she has broken it down into an overview of secondary science and has pulled out some key areas. So I'll go through those first before we then take a bit of a deeper dive into those. So again, there are some systemic challenges for secondary science teachers. There are teacher shortages, and there are some issues around capacity and inequity in access within science, within schools. Secondly, the triple science entitlement. So a finding from the Curriculum and Assessment Review is that all students should have the right to take biology, chemistry, and physics separately. At the moment, this isn't the case across all schools. And therefore, every single child needs to have that equitable access to take triple science at GCSE. So thinking about curriculum delivery as well then, content can be quite dense within the GCSE teaching years, and therefore streamlining content, ensuring purposeful, high-quality practical work, and that teachers have autonomy to teach their subject as they do really well. And again, as with primary, it's really about thinking about that integration of climate education within science. So it's not just solely thinking about integrating sustainability within science. It is recommended in different subjects as well, but thinking within science lessons, how this can be integrated within that. So that's thinking about where purposeful things can be made, purposeful links can be made within topics to ensure that sustainability and climate change is taught throughout science topics. And finally, thinking then about formula and assessment. So one of the key recommendations is looking at aligning assessment really clearly with curriculum aims, and equation sheets are going to be reassessed at a future date. So we'll have a look then at some of Asha's key takeaways and key findings from this. So some of the systemic challenges, and I have looked at those very briefly on the previous slide, but there is limited access to science subjects. There is an uneven provision for specialist teachers and constraints in school resources and infrastructure. And that may be around timetabling, or it may be around the recruitment of specialist teachers in key areas such as physics. Also, the impact of this then, students experience inconsistent opportunities to study science, and teachers from this can face pressures from workload and limited resources. So not allowing them to teach science as well as they could be if they were given all the resources that they needed. So one of the key recommendations from this is around workforce development, training and infrastructure investment, and this is mentioned specifically within the government response. So they are looking at ways how they can, help support more teachers into the profession, and also looking at teacher retention and recruitment. So then looking more specifically at that triple science entitlement then. So currently not all students have the opportunity to take triple science at GCSE. And the impact of that is that some students may miss that rigorous and ambitious pathway, and that is particularly prevalent within disadvantaged students. So there is a recommendation that has been accepted by the government that triple science is going to become a statutory offering to all students. So it doesn't mean here that every single child will take triple science or should take triple science, but they must have the option to if they so wish. And then finally, on this slide, we've got the curriculum delivery. So the volume of content that is currently within Science GCSE curriculum is too great. It does contain topics and details that may not support that learning progression. And if we do flick back to the primary slides where we're thinking about those core ideas, those big ideas within science, this needs to be really clear and really concise from primary all the way through to GCSE and beyond. Now, the impact of the volume of content of science that needs to be taught in GCSE, it can hinder that deep understanding and make teaching less coherent, so students can find that pathway more difficult to understand. So the recommendation that has come through here is that there needs to be a streamlining of the curriculum and emphasising the core disciplinary ideas and the knowledge progression that teachers need to teach students within secondary and within the GCSE years. So thinking then about climate education through a secondary lens. So the finding here was that climate change and sustainability are currently addressed as standalone topics, and they're not consistently embedded throughout the curriculum. And again, very similarly to primary, with this, students may then lack that understanding of the real world environmental challenges that we are currently facing, and teachers may struggle to deliver that coherent approach to climate science. So there are some recommendations here that have come through the curriculum and assessment response. So with the triple science offering becoming statutory and the curriculum being streamlined for combined science, there is more scope for climate science coverage as a consistent thread. So it no longer is a standalone topic, but is interwoven purposefully throughout multiple science topics. And the government response explicitly mentions 5 focus areas for climate education. So then finally looking at formula and assessment. So at the moment, assessments, a finding from this review was that assessments are not always well aligned with curriculum intent, and they are often focused on recall rather than the deep understanding and application questions. So here it may be that students may focus on memorization rather than that meaningful application of science, that real world understanding of science. So this has been split down, I apologize, into 2 recommendations here that I'd just like to draw your attention to. So the first recommendation is that there is work to be done with the major exam boards and regulators to align those assessments with curriculum goals to really emphasize that understanding and application. And then secondly, there is a recommendation here to reduce exam time on average by 2.5 to 3 hours overall for the average student, taking 8 or 9 GCSEs, and that is mentioned explicitly within the government response. So going back to the equation sheet that we mentioned earlier, that is going to remain stable until 2027, where that will be reviewed as well. So although we have touched on climate and sustainability education from a primary and a secondary perspective, as I mentioned right at the beginning, Kat Oakes, our sustainability lead, has just pulled out her key findings from this as well. So here it talks about embedding sustainability across subjects and across phases. So this isn't solely the responsibility of science, but it is to be a priority to be explicitly integrated into science, geography, DT, and citizenship as well. So science teaching must evolve, from where we are now to really embed sustainability at its core and climate themes as well. Rather than just treating them as standalone topics, they need to be interwoven and integrated into lessons and into learning, into topics where appropriate. So the recommendation from Kat here is to await the publication of the new curriculum before formally updating schemes of work. But things for schools to consider is that integrating climate and sustainability into teaching immediately by applying a climate lens to existing content that is already taught. Enrichment and outdoor learning is something that was mentioned explicitly as well. So the government has introduced a national enrichment benchmark, which guarantees children and pupils access to nature, outdoor and adventure. It specifically includes gardening, climate education and sustainability projects within that as well. And the impact of this is schools will be required to evidence this offer in the new school profiles for Ofsted inspection. So a recommendation that Kat has here is to consider using any outdoor learning projects that you are currently undertaking to deliver science objectives, fulfilling both academic requirements and the new entitlement enrichment as well. And I know from a primary perspective, there are lots of opportunities within the national curriculum as it is currently to fulfill this, fulfill the enrichment entitlement. And then finally, thinking really specifically about green skills and careers. So the review identifies climate science as a critical economic driver, and it really highlighting that rapid growth of green economy. It's expected to double the number of STEM jobs within the UK. The impact of that is growth in clean energy and construction jobs really demands a workforce equipped with those green skills. So, the children, the pupils, the students that we are teaching really need that solid understanding of these green skills and careers for their future. So a recommendation here is to embed that sustainability in every stage of education to inspire young people to innovate and lead the net zero transition. This then aligns with the government's post-16 education skills white paper as well, which supports the review's recommendations. So let's have a think about what's next. I'll take us back to that timeline. So this really is some reassurance that things are not going to change overnight. Schools are not going to have to implement something very, very quickly. We do have time to think about and action these changes so they are successful within all different school settings. So I'll break it down and I'll start for the primary colleagues joining us this afternoon. So for primary, Planet Science already has lots of resources that are meeting many of the recommendations within the curriculum and assessment review. So within this, there's already progression in sustainability within the topics, and climate science is taught through age-appropriate units. There's been some fantastic work going on with the education content team thinking about what sustainability and climate education topics they could interweave throughout their science, but also keeping that age appropriate as well, so not increasing that climate anxiety in young children. We're also thinking about strengthening that representation by including diverse and significant scientists and inventors within our units of work. And there's some fantastic examples of those within the Planet Science schemes of learning. And we really want to think about introducing children to that broad range of STEM careers to support that aspiration and show science as relevant and accessible to absolutely every child. So I have added a QR code here. If you would like to view the Planet Science landing page, where it has lots of different supporting resources that you can already use within your classroom that really link carefully with those recommendations. And I'll just leave that on for another moment if you are scanning it on your phone. If you are watching the webinar this afternoon on your phone, if you type Planet Science into and Twinkl, then you will be able to come up with our brand new landing page. So secondary then, what is it that teachers can be thinking about doing now? So thinking about Key Stage 3 lessons, we want to plan for them to allow that later triple science access where appropriate, and that's key and bolded here, touching on subjects that are taught within triple science only. So some examples that have been given here are transition metals, space, and genetic inheritance. Another thing that schools and educators could be looking at doing is checking those mapping documents to ensure that knowledge really builds progressively rather than topics feeling disconnected and added on. Is this connected with all the big ideas of science? Linking back then to that assessment and formula key finding that Ash pulled out from the findings there, test understanding and application as well as memory and recall. So thinking about those deeper understanding and application questions to ensure that children have the best access to those assessments. And then finally, then for secondary, what we could be looking at doing now is explicitly link core topics. And we've got the carbon cycle, energy and ecology to climate drivers, such as the greenhouse effect, carbon emissions, fossil fuel burning and deforestation. So they can see them then as contributing factors towards effects such as rising sea levels and extreme weather events. So then thinking specifically about sustainability and climate education, within the Eco Adventurers scheme of work that is currently on the Twinkl website, it delivers the curriculum reviews, cross-curricular recommendations through these 6 units here, which I've added in bold. So it really integrates these themes directly into science, geography, and DT. And they feature climate content and with amazing accreditations by the Royal Meteorological Society and a biodiversity unit co-created by Chester Zoo. There is also some CPD and training for teachers here. So there's climate change CPD training packs, but also there is a carbon literacy training for schools course, which has been accredited by the Carbon Literacy Project as well. And that really helps and guides schools through embedding sustainability actions aligned with climate action plans. So again, I know there's a lot of QR codes here, but if you would like to access our sustainability collection, please do scan that QR code there, or you can access it through our Twinkl website. So then the final bit of support that we have here for you this afternoon is that we have 2 final QR codes. So if you would like to understand what the curriculum and assessment review means for you for other subjects, then you can have a look on the left-hand side QR code here. That's got all subjects for primary and for secondary as well. So if there are any others that are interesting you and you would like to find out more about those, then you can find those there. And then we also have the QR code to the TeachMeet website. So here we have lots of different TeachMeets, all free, that you can go and access. And there's lots of other support for you if you would like to look at more curriculum and assessment reviews and what this means for your subjects and the subjects that you are teaching. But I would like to just say thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you found the recommendations and the review recommendations useful.